Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Now, today's episode, we want to have a look at the U.S. Special Operations Command, the U.S. Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC. What service has the premier, most elite, high-speed, low-drag special operations force in the United States? Now, obviously, the two big contenders constantly are the U.S. Navy SEAL Development Group, aka SEAL Team 6. SEAL Team 6 is no longer SEAL Team 6. It is called the Development Group, DevGru. So essentially you become a Navy SEAL, and then from the Navy SEALs, you can then make an attempt to enter DevGru. Next, Delta Force. Delta Force operators normally come from what you would call a quote-unquote Ranger track. Many Delta Force operators come from the Ranger Regiment, or one of the 3 Ranger battalions. Now, they can also come from the U.S. Green Beret, U.S. Special Forces as well. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole difference between the Green Berets and the Rangers. The Rangers are essentially a very elite light infantry force, and they also, within the Ranger Regiment itself, they have an elite company of reconnaissance Rangers that go through even more significant training, and some would argue that Ranger Reconnaissance Company is on par with the Naval Development Group and the Army Delta Force. And then obviously Green Berets, again, direct action, but mostly used as a force multiplier to train allied nation states, help allied nation states. But they do direct action. Not as much as Rangers, small unit tactics, what have you. Now, there's one other force that I should probably throw in there as well that I believe could be a direct competitor to both Delta and DevGru, SEAL Team 6. And that is going to be the Marine Raiders. This is the newest Tier 1 Special Operations Force, and it's from the U.S. Marine Corps. Now, I wanted to just go over a couple of things that I believe that could, in theory, taint the quality of some of these units, and I'll try to explain why. If we go over to the U.S. Delta Force. Now, as I had said before, a lot of the Delta guys come from U.S. Army Rangers. Now, the Rangers, right now, as we speak, are allowing quote-unquote qualified female soldiers to become U.S. Army Rangers, soldiers, and even officers. Now, the question that I have is, has the U.S. Army lowered standards to allow females to become Rangers? There's very few, and from my understanding, they don't spend a large amount of time in the regiment. And it almost feels like, to me, that they are simply tokens for a period of time. They go into the regiment, Ranger Regiment, and then they leave. But I guess the concern that I have is that, again, for the most part, Delta recruits from the Ranger Regiment. So if the Ranger Regiment is decreasing standards to allow females, one or two of the most qualified females. Now, again, are these females better than some of the best qualified male NCOs, male soldiers, male officers that could get into the regiment? I mean, there's only a few Ranger slots. Difficult to say. I am leaning towards no. And it is a token female or two that are being allowed into the Rangers. But again, are they degrading that track from Ranger in terms of Ranger quality into Delta Force? That's the question that I have. Go over to SEAL Team 6, Dev Gru. All right, so you first must become a Navy SEAL. And there are thousands of Navy SEALs. It's a fairly large organization. It's not as small as some people actually believe. Even the Naval Development Group is a fairly large organization now with multiple squadrons. Now, the drawbacks for the Navy SEALs. Are there women in the Navy SEALs? Again, Navy SEAL track to the Naval Development Group, DevGru. No, there's not. There has never been a female in the Navy SEALs. So thus that tells me that they are keeping their standards, that they are not lowering the standards to allow a female non-commissioned officer or officer into the Navy SEALs, which tells me that that track is pure, that it is of the highest quality, most intense operational men in the U.S. Armed Forces. Now, what's the one drawback of that track, Navy SEAL to DevGru? What is the one drawback? Well, anyone can become a Navy SEAL. Now let me hit the pause button. Obviously, not anyone can become a Navy SEAL. However, you can come off the street, join the Navy, go through naval basic training, and then go through a SEAL track. Whereas if you are in the Delta Force, you first had to make your way to become a U.S. Army Ranger. Now, I guess if you compare and contrast and you ask the question, quality, is the Navy SEAL a better trained soldier, not DevGru, but just a Navy SEAL, a team guy? Do they receive higher quality training than a U.S. Army Ranger? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And yes, you can come off the street and become a U.S. Army Ranger. My understanding is I could be wrong, is, again, same process. You go through one station training, OSET, which is infantry training, and then you go through, followed by infantry training, you got to go through airborne school, which essentially is about 4 weeks. Then you go through Ranger selection. That's the hard part. So they're not really receiving, a Ranger is not receiving that much more training In terms of Ranger selection, my understanding is just a really difficult land nav course with some small unit tactics thrown in, and I believe it's just a couple of months. It's not that long. It's not like a SEAL team track, which is the better part of a year. And then finally, you have the Marine Raiders. All right, so to become a Marine Raider, you first, normally you are going to be a Marine Rifleman. Marine Rifleman, or you will come out of one of the Force Reconnaissance Battalions, the Recon Battalions in the Fleet Marines. And if you're a really high-speed, low-drag Marine Rifleman, you could test out to become a Marine Raider. Now, to become a Marine Raider, again, is a process. 6 months to a year of training to eventually become a Marine Raider. But the start point is you're first going to be a Marine Rifleman. Is that track tainted? Maybe a little bit. There are Marine female riflemen. A few, not many, a few. But again, are they changing standards to allow a female Marine rifleman, which again is the track into the Marine Special Operations community, the Marine Raiders? Maybe, maybe not. The only service that has not, in my view, quote unquote, tainted its track by decreasing standards at the end of the day is going to be the Navy SEAL teams. We can say for certain there's no females in the Navy SEALs. And there's no females in development group, Dev Group. But at the same time, there's no females in Delta, and there's no females in Marine Force Recon. I'm sorry, not Marine Force Recon, Marine Raiders. There could be females in Force Recon. I don't know. If there's probably maybe one or two, if that. But I know the Marine Corps has been more adverse to allowing females into those, especially those combat arms units. In the U.S. Army, not so much. Not so much. The U.S. Army has several females, if not hundreds, that are in actual combat infantry units, tank units. Now, obviously, Rangers, quite a bit different. At best, one or two. But still, that's that track that goes from Ranger to Delta. Has it been tainted? Have they lowered standards? You have to ask that question. SEAL Team 6, Dev Group? Nope, hasn't happened. No females in SEALs. Not there. I think they're in the boat squadrons, but they're not SEAL operators. Either fleet SEAL teams or Dev Group. Doesn't exist. But again, don't get me wrong. There's no females in Delta or MARSOC. Raiders, Marine Raiders. Hopefully that makes sense. So the question is, what is the premier elite U.S. military Special Operations Force? Is it the Marine Raiders? Is it Dev Group? Is it Delta Force? Now, someone out there is going to say, well, why didn't you include the Air Force? Why didn't you include, the 24th Special Tactics Squadron? All right, look. No, that is a very, very high-quality unit. However, it usually facilitates operations with its partner DoD members, meaning Air Force personnel in the special operations field of the U.S. Air Force normally operate with the Navy SEALs, Delta, and they facilitate close air support. They were once called the Weathermen. Now they're the 24th Special Tactics Squadrons that exist now. Now, there is also units that exist that we don't know about. I have heard that there are or is or possibly is a Air Force unit on par with the British SAS that is not talked about. Is that possible? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There are obviously units in the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency that pull from Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, MARSOC, and then create these CIA units. But again, not really going to get into that because that's not DoD. That's, we could, but we're not. We're just comparing and contrasting U.S. Special Operations Forces within the Department of Defense, military. So I don't know. What do you think? What is your opinion? Coast Guard? Could I have brought up the Coast Guard? Not really. Not really. And then again, in all probability, there are units. I just talked about the possibility of there being a special air service type unit in the Air Force that does direct action missions on par with SEAL Team 6, DevGru, MARSOC, Delta Force. Could there be units that, or is there units that become a offspring of DevGru or Delta Force? Because look, Delta Force, if you look at Delta Force in the 80s, you look at SEAL Team 6 in the 80s, the 90s, they have grown massively. DevGru is much, much bigger than what it was in its early stages of creation. Much bigger. So then the question is there a unit now within DevGru that is even more elite that you have to apply through and go through another process and training to become part of that unit that we just don't know about? It's just not out there. Possibly. Very much so. Again, Delta Force. Delta Force, much bigger now than its original formation. But make no mistake, even though I'm kind of knocking on the Rangers, I'm knocking on the Marines a little bit for possibly lowering standards to allow in females, these are high quality units. The best of the best. And if there is a difference between, say, DevGru, Delta, MARSOC, I don't think MARSOC, I don't think the Marine Raiders get enough credit in terms of their actual capability. I think their capability, again, probably is on par with Delta and DevGru. But again, just because they're new, they're just not talked about as much. And at the same time, the Navy SEALs get a lot more exposure in terms of press and ooh and ah than Delta Force. Delta Force for a long time just was not really talked about. But again, that question will always linger, at least for me, especially if your main track for creating a Delta operative is coming from the Ranger Bats. Just saying, you lower standards or change standards, You have to ask that question, right? Am I wrong? Let's hear it in the comment section. What are your thoughts? As always, thanks for joining us. More to come. Good day.